Good morning, everyone. I'm Audrey DeBarros, Executive Director of Commuting Solutions. We'll get our program started in a couple of minutes. We're just inviting or accepting a few other folks to the meeting. Thank you. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Audrey DeBarros. I'm the Executive Director of Commuting Solutions. Thanks again for joining us today. We are pleased to convene our coalition surrounding several transportation funding and policy issues that are pressing and timely. But before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items to ensure our meeting runs smoothly. Please add your name and organization to the chat. We will mute and turn off cameras to reduce distractions during the meeting. We will definitely provide time for Q&A via the chat. So please do add any questions as our guest speakers are speaking, and we will cover as many as we can during the time available. And we are recording this meeting and it will be added to our website for future reference. So thanks again for attending our second membership meeting specifically for the State Highway 119 corridor located between Boulder and Longmont, which is made possible by our 2021 presenting supporter, Boulder County. I would also like to recognize our gold sponsors, Colorado High Performance Transportation Enterprise, Elevations Credit Union, the Northwest Chamber Alliance, Google, and the RTD. The rest of our 2021 sponsors were included in the slideshow at the beginning of the event, and we are so grateful for your generous support of Commuting Solutions. If this is your first time attending a membership meeting, Commuting Solutions is a nonprofit organization who serves as the Transportation Management Organization, or TMO, for the Northwest Metro region. And it's a role that we have proudly served for over 22 years to convene public, private, and nonprofit sector stakeholders and our transportation partners regarding transportation needs in the Northwest Metro region. We are also a founding member of the DRCOG Way to Go Regional TDM Partnership, working together with our other TMOs and Dr. Cog to reduce traffic congestion and improve air quality in the Denver metro region. It's a really exciting time to be working in transportation as there is new momentum building for it at a federal, state, regional, and local level. We are extremely grateful for the relief funds that our federal government has provided to our states, transit agencies, local governments, businesses, and the general public, totaling over $1.9 trillion, the American Rescue Plan that came out a couple of months ago. State and local governments will benefit from the transportation as well as $30 billion for transit agencies nationwide. At a federal level, Congress is also in the process of appropriations and authorization requests for its members. The Northwest Mayors and Commissioners Coalition and Commuting Solutions, we're grateful to share that Representative Nagu supported a $5 million request application that we submitted for the State Highway 119, State Highway 52 intersection improvements as one of his member designated projects. And we just found out yesterday that it has been supported by the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So it's moving through the approval process at a federal level, which is extremely exciting. Last Friday, we also submitted a nearly $2 million request for State Highway 119 first and final mile connections benefiting CU Boulder and the town of Niwot, pre-construction funding for the bikeway along 119, and funding for Longmont's first and main station to Senator Hickenlooper and to Senator Bennett. And then lastly, at a federal level, we're working with our partners to submit a US DOT RAISE grant. This is one that we submitted last year as a bill grant for the city of Longmont to improve and reconstruct the Hover 119 intersection. And that application is due in July. So there's a lot of momentum and work going on specifically for this important corridor in our region. And then at a state level, it's been a very busy season, legislative season. You'll hear all about that from Will Tour in just a minute here. We're pleased to have him with us. But not to steal his thunder, but there's a really important bill that was approved last week that'll bring significant funding for multimodal transportation to Colorado. And it's really a very transformative investment and policy direction that we've all been working on really for decades, and will present new opportunities to invest in the CDOT 10-year pipeline of projects, which includes many of the Northwest region's important corridors, such as State Highway 119, Colorado 7, US 287, and Colorado 42, just to serve as a few examples of regional transportation priorities. So again, thank you for joining us for this 119 membership meeting here today. Please do stay in touch with us as we continue to advocate for multimodal transportation investments to this important corridor and other corridors in our region. To get us started, I am very pleased to have with us our friend Will Tour, the Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office. As you may recall, Governor Polis adopted the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Reduction Roadmap back in January, not that long ago, which establishes targets for reducing greenhouse gas over the next several years. As a result of the roadmap, this legislative session has been very busy with bills to implement the roadmap, including Senate Bill 260, the Sustainability of Transportation Systems Bill, which is on its way to the governor's desk for signature. It's a major milestone for Colorado. Please welcome Will to provide a summary of this historic accomplishment for transportation and climate change and other legislative bills that are coming up or have been implemented, as well as what's next for the roadmap implementation. So welcome, Will. It's great to have you with us.
Great. Thank you very much, Audrey. And it's great to be here this morning. It's been a very exciting legislative year on the climate action front. And so what I thought I would do is start by giving a little bit of an overview, sort of going beyond transportation to give a sense of the context, and then just dive in a little bit more to some of the details around SB 260, both on the funding and the planning side, sort of the implications for being able to move forward towards greenhouse gas reductions. So next slide, please. So while the session isn't quite over, we're hoping it will be done by midnight tonight. It's possible it could go a few more days, but we've seen, I think, a really historic level of attention to both um, climate change and to really addressing climate change, both broadly and specifically in the context of transportation. Certainly there was Senate Bill 260, a major step forward on both sustainably funding our transportation system and providing new investments in transportation electrification, as well as really highlighting the importance of climate in the transportation planning process. As of yesterday evening, the Senate had passed a new version of House Bill 1266 on second reading, and we anticipate that that bill will likely make it through the full legislature by the end of the day today. This is a broad climate bill. It replaces Senate Bill 200, which was a bill that the administration was not supporting, but with a bill that really targets deep reductions from the oil and gas industry and from industry in general, setting statutory targets for reductions in those sectors, as well as providing a regulatory backstop to the reductions that we are already seeing in the electricity sector. It also does a larger focus on environmental justice at the State Department of Public Health and Environment, creating an environmental justice ombudsperson position and a new environmental justice advisory committee that in addition to having an advisory role, will be allocating funds for environmental improvement projects in environmental justice communities. One of the things that the bill does is takes environmental non-compliance fines and moves them from the general fund into a new category for investment in those communities. That there was a bill that to provide funding for the Office of Just Transition that was created 2 years ago, and then a remarkable package of bills in the building sector. I won't run through all of these, but would note that taken collectively, I think that it is probably the sort of most impactful set of legislation that we've seen in any state in terms of decarbonizing buildings. That probably the highlight is Senate Bill 264 that creates carbon reduction goals for our gas distribution utilities that include the emissions from their customers burning gas in their buildings, and requires those utilities to create clean heat plans, which are analogous to clean energy plans that electric utilities adopt, that show how they will achieve those carbon targets. There's also one bill among this large package of buildings bills that I think would have interest in the transportation space. House Bill 1303, which is greenhouse gas impacts of construction materials, is focused on state projects, and it essentially sets up a system to, over time, have the state procurement system assure that as we're doing both building projects and transportation projects, that we are sourcing materials that have low embodied carbon. And in the initial years for transportation, it will really focus on making sure that we have the appropriate data available to be able to do this. But over time, it should really help to sort of drive the market for things like green concrete, recycled asphalt, low embodied carbon steel as we move forward. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 260. Again, I come at Senate Bill 260 was perhaps a little bit of a different focus than some of the presentations that you may have heard from folks who live more in the transportation world. I'm living very much in the world of sort of energy and climate, and that's the focus that I bring to Senate Bill 260. So, Senate Bill 260 creates a variety of streams of new fee revenue, with fees on gasoline and diesel use, fees on transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, fees on home retail delivery, as well as phasing in fees on electric vehicles over the next decade to assure that by the time that there are a large number of EVs on the road, each EV would be paying approximately the same amount as the average gasoline vehicle on the road. The as part of this package, uh, the bill really makes, I think, historic investments in transportation electrification. From what we can tell, really the only state that I think has sort of larger dedicated funding for electrification is the state of California. And it does this by creating 3 new enterprises. One of them is a charging enterprise that lives within the Energy Office. A second is a fleet electrification enterprise that lives at the Department of Public Health and Environment. And the third is a public transit electrification enterprise that lives within the Department of Transportation. So the charging enterprise will have approximately $310 million projected over the next decade. And the focus will be comprehensively building out charging infrastructure, and hydrogen fueling infrastructure is also an allowed investment, focusing both on light duty vehicles, but also on the needs of medium and heavy duty vehicles. There's also an equity component built into this enterprise, with a focus on helping low and moderate income Coloradans switch to both electric vehicles, but also to electric bicycles. And we are anticipating the creation of a program that will help people who have high emitting older vehicles replace them with an electric vehicle or with an electric bicycle. The fleet electrification enterprise that lives at CDPHE has a fairly broad focus. It includes medium and heavy duty trucks, probably starting with delivery trucks, where the market is most developed for moving to zero emission vehicles. Transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, because Uber and Lyft drivers often drive those vehicles 3 or 4 times more miles than your typical passenger vehicle. There's a real significant benefit to electrifying those fleets that goes beyond most individually owned passenger vehicles. In addition, because there's so much evidence that anybody who gets in an electric vehicle and gets the experience of riding in one is far more likely to switch from gas to electric in the future, there's a huge value that comes from exposing all of their passengers to electric vehicles. So there will be a focus on electrification of those Uber and Lyft and similar fleets. Big focus on school bus electrification, as well as electrification of public fleets in general. And then the public transit enterprise that lives within CDOT will focus on helping transit agencies switch to electric. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Would also note that there are certainly other funding streams within SB 260 that you can think of as sort of green funding. There's funding for the Multimodal Options Fund. There's the creation of a new non-attainment fund that is focused on air quality mitigation within the ozone non-attainment area, with, I think, a particular focus on the air quality impacts in some of our most impacted areas. So think of somewhere like North Denver, Commerce City, where you've got multiple large highways, lots of truck traffic, and significant industrial operations. But the funding will be available across the non-attainment area. And there's also funding for the Revitalizing Main Street program that is, really focused on repurposing road space from single-use automobile use to creating roads that are, safer for multiple modes and can be used by transit users, walking, biking, and in some cases repurposing road space for things like retail and restaurant use. Really grew out of the experience during the pandemic. We would also note, as a reminder that there's just under $1 billion going into the local share of the HUTF. And while people often think of that as road funds, in fact, there were two pieces of legislation over the last decade, Senate Bill 48 in 2013 and Senate Bill 1 in 2018, that have made those dollars completely flexible. So while they can be used for roadway purposes, they can also be used for transit, TDM programs, transit operations, bicycle pedestrian investments, or roads, really at the discretion of the local government. Would also note that the Multimodal Options Fund does require a one-to-one match from locals in order to gain access to those funds. So we certainly hope that local governments will use a significant portion of their HUTF as match to double that multimodal fund. Next, please. And I think this is my last slide. Another element of Senate Bill 260 that I'm not sure to what extent people have really grasped is the extent to which it really does refocus the transportation planning process. And there, I believe it's section 29 of the bill, really makes air quality and greenhouse gas emissions a central part of the transportation planning process in a way that they never have been before. It requires CDOT to develop new procedures to address vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions associated with transportation plans. It requires CDOT and the metropolitan planning organizations to implement greenhouse gas rules that are adopted by the Air Quality Control Commission. And that's important because there is a active rulemaking that will take place this summer at the AQCC that is focused on greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. That what we anticipate is that the proposed rule will set GHG budgets for transportation plans, somewhat analogous to what is done with criteria pollutants through the federal conformity process in the non-attainment area today. And that those budgets would then be constraints on the planning process and would really help to shape the projects that are chosen in order to sort of assure that the system as a whole is moving towards lower emissions as opposed to higher emissions over time. And what this says is that once the Air Commission adopts those budgets, that both CDOT and MPOs like DRCOG will need to implement those rules. It also requires CDOT and the MPOs, beyond implementing the AQCC rules, to otherwise take action to help achieve the state GHG emissions reduction targets that are set in statute. There's a goal of a 50% reduction by 2030 and a 90% reduction by 2050. That's now going to be part of the mission for the Department of Transportation. It also requires that the induced demand is taken into account. One of the things that we've seen historically, and T-Rex is a great example of this. When T-Rex was built, the state used transportation models that basically suggested that there was sort of a fixed amount of demand and they would expand the highway and there would then be a wider pipe for that fixed demand and congestion would go away. Of course, we all know that's not what happened in practice, that what happened was you created more space to drive, and it it drove more demand. And within 4 years of construction, the levels of congestion were back up to what they had been prior to the construction. And there's a long history of really not taking into account induced demand when doing transportation planning. CDOT has begun, I think, doing a much better job of addressing induced demand. And this puts it into statute that there, for regionally significant transportation projects, induced demand will have to be part of the planning process. There's language that requires the transportation planning process to look at the impacts of land use and encourage local land use decisions that reduce VMT and GHG emissions. I think we all know that, you know, probably the biggest driving factor for increased driving are the decisions that are being made by local governments, both to do significant amounts of development outside of existing urbanized areas that, you know, separate where people live from where they work, and the decisions that many local governments make that often have sort of thriving job bases to limit the ability to build housing in those communities and sort of force people to live far away. Those are decisions that in Colorado are made by local governments, but they have enormous impacts on the transportation system. They drive big costs for the state to try to sort of fix the problems that are created, and they clearly are a major driver of VMTs and GHG emissions. So the direction here is to encourage and incentivize different land use decisions going forward. It requires these rules to apply to the next update of the 10-year plan. So it doesn't require sort of going backwards into the planning process, but within the next year or so, as we start doing updates to those plans, that would have to be applying those new rules. Requires mitigation of construction emissions, creates a new environmental justice division within CDOT to make sure that we're, you know, looking at, you know, both the history of sort of how highway projects have impacted low-income communities and communities of color, and making sure that we are not replicating the mistakes of the past as we move into the future. And it also does require that MPOs in the non-attainment area are going to need to update their regional plans subject to the new procedures and rules, and sort of ties that to the availability of the multimodal funds. So there's a lot that's in here, and I think it's really a very significant modification to the transportation planning process that for the first time will really make reduction of greenhouse gases and acting on climate a central focus of transportation going forward. And with that, I will just throw it open to any questions.
Great, thank you, Will. If you do have any questions, please do add them to the chat. We do have time for a question or two. While I wait a moment for that, I just want to say thank you to your service to Colorado. I know you've been working hard and long on all of this work and bills this session. And a lot of these bills will benefit the Northwest Metro region and the multimodal corridor projects that we want to bring forward regionally as well as locally. So thank you for your service and for all of the progress this year. Those of us who have been working to advocate for new transportation funding, this is a long time coming. So yeah. Thank you for that. One question I had is regarding the greenhouse gas transportation budgets. What is the approval process for that? I believe it needs to go through the CDOT Commission as well as the Air Quality Control Commission, but could you clarify that? And then I believe that's coming up this summer. I know that's a really important milestone.
That's right. So I believe that there will likely be a briefing on this at the next Transportation Commission meeting. But the the way that it would be structured is there will be a formal rulemaking at the State Air Quality Control Commission. I think that likely the timing has been a little bit of a moving target, largely because everybody who was involved in working on the rule was also involved in Senate Bill 260, and we just got had to focus on the legislation. But we're anticipating that I think there will probably be a formal notice of rulemaking in July at the Air Commission, and it's then a 2 to 3 months process to go through that formal process before the final rulemaking hearing. And so the budgets would be adopted by the Air Commission. However, the implementation would happen through CDOT. And so I think that we would likely see a sort of dual process with budgets adopted by the Air Commission and then implementation rules adopted by the Transportation Commission.
Thank you. We had a question come in, and I only have time for one. City Council member Aaron Brockett asked, just one moment, I got to get back to that one. He's wondering how specifically will local land use decisions be encouraged to be made in ways that reduce emissions?
So that's a great question, and I would say the legislation is very broad, and that is something that I think the state agencies will need to sort of flesh out. So it's not specified in statute exactly how that will happen. I would say there a few examples. So if you look at some of the affordable housing legislation that moved forward this year, it gives, I think, a sense of the way that we're going to be thinking about this in the transportation context. So we modify the state modified rules around inclusionary zoning to allow inclusionary zoning to be applied to rental properties, but required that essentially as part of that, in order to use that new authority, local governments will have to do more to allow denser housing within their communities. There was another piece of legislation that created a new affordable housing fund, but to get access to that fund, communities have to show that they are taking one of several actions to relax exclusionary zoning that keeps denser housing out of their communities. So I think that gives an example of the way that we'll probably be thinking about it is, there is a long tradition of local control. I don't think that anyone is looking at adopting rules that would say, a community has to do this on the land use front. But I think that we will likely see efforts to tie access to programs or tie access to funding to decisions that have a nexus to that. So if we're going to be investing state dollars to sort of fix transportation problems, saying, you need to maybe making local land use decisions that are going to make those problems better rather than worse, in order to have access to those funds or in order to have priority access to those funds. I think that's the kind of thinking that we would be doing. And there's a new land use position within CDOT, and the former Rifle Assistant City Manager, Nathan, I think Lundquist, is in that position. And I think that, over the next 6 months or so, I think there will be a sort of analytical process and stakeholder engagement around thinking about, where are the best levers for working with local governments on land use.
Well, thanks again, Will. I hope you have an awesome day and good luck wrapping up the session, and well done.
Thank you.
All right. We'll turn our attention regionally to the RTD. We're pleased to have with us our two RTD board members, Lynn Geisinger representing District O and Eric Davidson representing District I, to give us an update on all things RTD. The RTD Accountability Committee is in the process of preparing recommendations. And we're pleased also to have with us Elise Jones, who co-chaired that committee, waiting in the wings, and in case there's any questions for her. So on that note, Eric, I'll turn it over to you to get us started. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Audrey, and thank you to everybody for having us here. I appreciate it. I'm gonna take us through just a little bit of an update of some things going on at RTD. I'm gonna try to use my time wisely so I can hand off to my colleague, Lynn, Director Geisinger. I am learning after a couple months being here now that we're all directors, director this, director that. So I'll go through this as quick as I can. Director Geisinger is going to take us through some of the accountability updates, and I'm sure Elise Jones will be able to help with those questions as well. So on the next slide, I'll just highlight some of the things I'm going to chat about. We'll talk a little bit about our strategic planning process, which we're in the midst of, some of the Reimagine RTD efforts, which I think many of you are familiar with, and then just a few general updates that I wanted to provide, and then I'll go ahead and hand off to Director Geisinger here to talk about Accountability Committee, and we'll do our best to leave some time for some questions. So on the next slide, I'll talk about our strategic planning process. What's been going on right now, you know, we have a new CEO. I continue to say and will continue to say that our new board of directors, those that came in 2 years ago and the board that's been working together, the best thing they did, certainly before I got there, was making the tough decision to change our leadership. I think we have a strong CEO in Ms. Deborah Johnson, who has a breadth of industry-wide experience across a couple of different markets. And one of the things that's good about that is there's a lot of opportunities, but with that comes the challenge of needing to really plan out who and what this organization is going to be moving forward. So the board of directors is engaged with Ms. Johnson in working on a strategic plan. Right now, we're looking largely out at the next year, but we will be putting together some tenets and some values for the long-term strategic plan. We're working on things like our mission, our values, specific success outcomes that will help set the North Star for the organization. We had originally been targeting completing the strategic plan in June. We will see where we finish out June here. I think none of us want to cut short the discussions that we're having as an organization. They're fairly fundamental at this point. I can share that some of the types of ideas that are coming from RTD's leadership right now include making our mission a lot simpler. One of the missions that has been drafted so far is making lives better through connections. And while that sounds incredibly broad, we're looking for those kind of North Star values that everybody in the organization can be asking themselves, you know, every day, what are we doing today to make lives better through connecting people together? So those are the types of conversations that are going on. There are 4 major areas that we were focused on our strategic planning that took place over this past weekend, which were community value and customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success. And just to touch on each of those, with community value, I think all of us know that RTD has certainly struggled, especially in recent years, with community-wide trust. And one of the things that we're talking about as an organization is, what does that mean? What do we need to provide to the community to produce value for everybody, for our customers, and for the community at large? Certainly one of those that we started to bring up as a board that I think the board would like to dig into more is environmental sustainability. Some of the things we just got to hear some great updates in terms of what the state is doing. So that community is one aspect of community value, along with equity issues, and how do we focus on values along the lines of equity, and then certainly what are all the areas that we can do to rebuild trust. Customer excellence, you know, we have a lot of customers who have continued to use the system throughout COVID, and it really calls into tension what we need to be doing to make sure we're providing the highest and best and most quality experience to our customers, to attract new ones, and also to make sure we're taking care of those who have been with us. Employee ownership, you know, we're only as good as all the folks who work in the organization. We have a lot of wonderful folks who do work in the organization, but we want to continue to attract more, retain more of that strong talent. And then financial success is certainly near and dear to me as our vice chair of our Finance Administration and Audit Committee. I think we all know RTD has struggled with overcapitalization, some difficult financials. That looks difficult in the years to come. I feel very confident that we're making the moves right now, both from a leadership standpoint and strategic decision to help improve that. So that's some about our strategic planning, just some of the conversations, more to come on where we finish that. On the next slide, I'll just briefly touch on Reimagine RTD, and it's a strategic plan of its own sense happening alongside what we're doing at the strategic plan level with the board, but obviously a cross-disciplinary and cross-community organization and effort to reimagine who RTD is going to be in the years to come. I think many of us are familiar with that. Probably the easiest thing is to jump to the next slide that we have here and just remind everybody of where we have settled on Reimagine RTD, of focusing on mobility, focusing on equity, focusing on financial success and stability, thinking with 100-year thinking of how this organization will be here forever. Partnerships, again, part of that community value, workforce, and sustainability. What I like about this is we are seeing our strategic plan that's coming together as an organization align with a community-wide discussion around Reimagine. A lot of details to fill in to make all of this a reality, but we certainly are seeing some alignment in at least the values that we all have for transportation. And finally, on this last slide is really just a placeholder before I hand off to Director Geisinger. One thing I'll just briefly touch on, many of you are probably aware that there was a state audit that was completed and a series of recommendations that came to RTD in December. It was pretty tough. And one thing that, again, is near and dear to me as vice chair of our Finance Administration and Audit Committee is that our internal audit function has not been performing to the level it should be for an organization of this size and type and value to the community for quite some time. The audit that we received in 2020 identified issues with our internal audit function that were also identified 10 years prior in 2010. An update I can provide that maybe is less well known is we did complete a peer review with APTA and brought in a great panel of folks with audit expertise from everything from MTA on down. Very large transit organizations helped look at our internal audit, again, identified a lot of fundamental issues. The thing I can report there is I'm delighted that our board has some new leadership, that we have some new leadership in the organization. We are biting this off. We're tackling it. It's not the exciting headline getter, but by the end of this year, we're going to have a much stronger internal audit process and function. And going into 22 and beyond, I think we'll be able to much better identify risks to this organization that will help us be stronger. Things like the workforce attrition that we saw in years past. We'll be able to see those things coming as best we can. So with that, thank you for the time. Thank you for allowing us to speak on this. I'm going to hand off to Director Geisinger to speak about Accountability Committee.
Thanks so much, Eric. I'm Lynn Geisinger. I represent Western Boulder County, District O. I've been here numerous times at Commuting Solutions, and always a pleasure. If we can go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Accountability Committee today. And as Audrey said, Elise Jones is on the call. Elise served as well as one of the co-chairs of the committee, along with Crystal Murillo. And you can see the makeup of the committee here. The statute that created, or the agreement with the legislature and RTD that created the committee, defined certain expertise for people that needed to be on the committee, and then the transportation chairs and the governor appointed the committee. And I think it turned out to be a good, well-balanced group. As chair and vice chair of the Communications and Government Relations Committee, Troy Whitmore and I were ex officio members, and were able to, I think, to contribute from RTD's perspective and ours as well. Next slide. The committee came out with a preliminary report in January of this year, and the main purpose was that the RTD statute is getting old, and it had certain provisions that didn't seem to fit as well now. For instance, requirements of a certain amount of fare box ratio, amount of money that's taken in by fare box. In reality, that was not a huge problem because the fare box was defined to include all our grants and a number of other income streams. But these things, this was a really good way to start, I think. It put us on a good level working with RTD and the Accountability Committee, which was completely independent. But allowing the board to assess parking fees if they want to at some point, and people get nervous about that. I don't think the board is ever going to be adding a lot of parking fees. We recognize that those are the same as fares in many cases, but there may be situations where we're working with a local government that wants to discourage parking, and or maybe at some point we could lower fares and increase parking or something along those lines. Some TOD provisions to make it easier to build equitable TOD, affordable housing, things like that. And that was signed into law on May 24th. Next slide. The final recommendation in that provision, in that earlier statement, they also gave some recommendations for COVID relief funding, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next slide. The final recommendations are due out in a final report July 1st, and there's some dates here. The most critical information, I think, is what's at the bottom, which is there's a survey that I know Audrey and her team are putting in the chat, the link to that. I encourage you to go online and take the survey. There's some good questions. At the end of the survey or in a link, you can go look at all the specific recommendations, but it's a great way to give us feedback. There's also oral public comment at the virtual public hearing on June 14th at 8:30. And I think they'll also be putting that link in the chat. Next slide. Okay, into the final recommendations. The first one here, I'm glad it's first. This is a PowerPoint that Elisa and Crystal put together or presented recently. And I think this is one of the more significant recommendations to be coming from the Accountability Committee. The idea is to work with RTD in a very structured, collaborative decision-making process to increase input from the local communities. And there still is questions to be determined. What types of people are on the councils? What areas are served by the councils? There are two different proposals. One is that they would be county-based, and the other would be that they would be travel shed-based, where they basically divide the district into quadrants, and then perhaps add Boulder County as a separate local service council. But I think it offers some structured ways of getting local input. Next slide. Second recommendation is about fares and pass programs. And when our new CEO, Deborah Johnson, came in, one of the first things she said was, wow, these fares are high and these fares are complex. We need to do a study. We need to look at what we can do to make these changes. And so these are the Accountability Committee's recommendations. Discounted fares, youth, senior, disabled, and low income, to make them free or heavily discounted. The last one, make EcoPass available to every employee in the district. I'm a huge EcoPass fan. I'd love to see it beyond just employees for some of the equity reasons and to reach others. But of course, the devil's in the details. Next slide. Service delivery. This gets into a number of areas dealing with first and final mile and accessibility. A number of these recommendations have to do with accessibility for persons with disabilities. And that's an area that was of significant interest to the Accountability Committee, and an area that I think RTD and our new CEO in particular is working hard with the disability and mobility advocates to address some of their concerns. Next slide. Northwest Rail is always a hot topic, no exception in the Accountability Committee. One of the members of the committee, Rep. Bridges, expressed a lot of concerns about, the financials, and there was a lot of back and forth to come to these recommendations, but I think they're good. They support the Northwest Rail alignment for the Front Range passenger rail. Right now, in the federal infrastructure bill, there's $80 billion for Amtrak, and Amtrak says that Front Range passenger rail is one of its top corridors if it starts to open corridors. A lot of ifs between here and there, but an interesting possibility. The second one is perform a complete and comprehensive analysis of the project. What the board and staff are moving forward on is a complete analysis of the peak period Northwest Rail proposal. The full analysis of the full project was done a number of years ago, and this is to add into that and see if it's sort of looking at Front Range passenger rail as a potential funding mechanism. And then until adequate funding can be found, the focus is on significantly expanding BRT services up here, like the Flatiron Flyer, like Highway 119, which is the highest priority corridor at this point, and other Northwest corridors. Next slide, please. I need to wind up here pretty soon, I think. Partnerships, I'll just say that there was a lot of discussion, and this is a critical piece moving forward. It was interesting to hear Will Tour talk about potential money to local governments where they could partner on transportation and transit infrastructure and projects. And that's basically what the committee's encouraging. Next slide. And this one is about a dashboard. If you go to the RTD website, there is a lot of information, a lot of financial information. There's we've increasingly been adding to it, and the staff has been adding to it. But what the accountability committee was looking for was a very accessible dashboard where you could kind of see the highlights and not get too in the weeds. And a lot of this is on there, but I think we'll see a change maybe in how that's presented. Next slide. And then the use of federal COVID funding. RTD, it says it will receive over $770 million in federal COVID relief funds. It sounds like a huge amount of money, but there's been a lot of money lost, especially in fares. Sales and use tax is starting to come back pretty well. RTD, that money is very defined by the federal government, and the accountability committee added these recommendations, to use the money to restore transit services, attract riders, and help the agency recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. So there may be other money that's freed up as this money is used. A lot of that is exactly what this money is for, restoring service and paying operations and those things. Next slide. Questions. I'm going to ask, I don't know if we have any time left, Audrey, if Elise has any comments to make. And again, please go online and take the survey and consider public comment at the hearing.
Lynn, I think you did a great job, so I don't have anything to add. It's been great serving with you, and I encourage people to take the survey, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Elise.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat so far, Director Geisinger and Director Davidson, but one question on behalf of Commuting Solutions would be, thank you for the work of the RTD Accountability Committee. It is greatly appreciated. What do you see as next steps in terms of, the RTD board considering these recommendations? RTD doesn't have to implement them. I believe you just have to provide justification if you choose not to. So just curious about, the wrap up of the report and RTD's consideration going forward. Thank you.
Sure, thanks for the question. I think it's a great one. We will get the final report right around July 1st. The plan for the committee defines the process that we would have, the RTD board would have 45 days to respond. And as you said, either accept the recommendation or state reasons why we would not accept the recommendation. And then I'm pretty sure I don't know that it's scheduled yet, but I think the committee is planning to come back to discuss anything that the board is not recommending adoption on. At least there's no date on that yet, right?
That date has not been set, but we would be inviting RTD to Deborah Johnson, the CEO, to come and speak directly to the committee. And I think we'd invite representatives from the governor's office and the state transportation committee to come and join us to hear directly from RTD on why they would choose not to implement some of the recommendations, so that there'd be a little bit clearer understanding if they decide not to move forward with things that we've suggested.
Great.
I apologize. I know there are a couple of questions in the chat, but I want to make sure we have time to get to our final two guest speakers. So just on behalf of Commuting Solutions, thank you for your service on the RTD Board of Directors for the Northwest region. We greatly appreciate it. And folks, do participate in the survey to give input and feedback. Have a good day.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thanks.
All right. We are so excited that RTD and CDOT are continuing to set the stage for the next set of improvements to the 119 corridor located between Boulder and Longmont. As you've heard, 119 is our top priority as identified in the Northwest Area Mobility Study. And in building off of the work that RTD completed in 2019 through the Planning and Environmental Linkage Study, CDOT and RTD are now implementing the next phase of corridor design. So I'm pleased to have with us my colleague Adnana Murtik, who is the project manager, to give us an update on the project status. So Adnana, welcome.
Thank you, Audrey. Good morning, and good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Adnana Murtik with CDOT in Region 4. I'm a project manager for State Highway 119 Safety and Mobility Project. So can you go, Christina, to the next slide, please? Thank you. Let's just have a quick review of project goals. First of all, focusing on improvement, safety in the whole corridor, maximize intersection operational efficiency, maximize corridor-wide operational efficiency as a whole, and then trying to maximize the number of people who are able to move through that corridor, and at the same time trying to reduce their travel time through that same corridor. And also the goal is to improve connectivity to the bicycle and pedestrian network along the State Highway 119. Next slide, please. So right now the HBT has ongoing study, the traffic alternatives analysis study in this corridor, and basically the need for that improvements is based on the traffic data and observations of the pinch points in the corridor, which are resulting in substantial congestion. And then based on those areas of congestion, the first intersection that was observed and analyzed during this study was State Highway 119 and State Highway 52 intersection. And basically this was our first step working toward the optimization in the corridor. Next slide, please. So the analysis has shown that the split intersection with 2 lanes on State Highway 119 and State Highway 52 intersection would provide the most benefits in regulating traffic through this intersection. However, moving forward, the BRT and possible managed lanes are still part of that analysis, and they will be observed for the whole corridor. And the next step in the process will be recommendations for the rest of the corridor, which we are anticipating to be completed by September of this year. Next slide, please. So while we are waiting on the results of the study, we are trying to to have data collection done and have the preliminary design phase completed. So basically, there's a whole list of things that are happening in the background, really. I mean, we have survey, working on survey, and we have complete median and roadside as a phase 1, and then phase 2, which we will be completing this summer for the rest of the roadway. For the environmental, the study area is defined, and then that data collection, as I said, is ongoing as well, and delineation of wetlands is also complete. With utilities and irrigation, we're focusing on coordination with State Highway 119 commuter bikeway project, because we are aware that with our design, there's going to be probably a huge impact on those facilities. So we think that is a really important step to make at this point in our work. And also subsurface utility investigation is planned to be completed this summer. We have a group of, for traffic and ITS who's working on corridor concept of operation and systems engineering analysis that is also in development, and making progress on that as well. Next slide, please. So this map, although it's probably hard to read on a small screen, is a really great summary of all current and future projects in the corridor. The current efforts are really focused on the coordination between the ongoing projects. However, funding strategy coordination is high on the list for all partners in the corridor, and will help keep the vision for the bus rapid transit routes and station priority. So that would be a quick update on the project. So thank you for having me, Audrey. Really appreciate it. And this is my contact information if you have any questions. Thank you.
If you have any questions for Adnana, please do add them to the chat. Adnana, on behalf of Commuting Solutions, thank you to all of the CDOT team, RTD, and your consultants for the progress to identify the first phase of improvements for this important corridor to our region. In terms of the 52 intersection, and you included a rendering of what that could potentially look like, can you say a little bit more about what's anticipated there? I know that's a huge bottleneck for the corridor and the traffic operations for the whole corridor. And obviously with us including BRT station improvements and the bikeway, there's just, you know, a lot that needs to be taken into consideration. So if you could just say a little bit more about that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you you provided actually a very good summary to what we're doing right now already. So it's just pretty much this is really a basic concept at this moment, and then we are still evaluating all the options there on that intersection, just to make sure that everything, like you said already, that everything fits as it should, and that it would provide a really good starting point for the rest of the corridor. So again, making sure that that's not a pinch point anymore, making sure that we can fit the BRT station, making sure that we can incorporate, if study shows that managed lanes are the options that we want to go with, that we can have those included as well. So yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress, really, and I think just by making this step and having this, you know, configuration right now that we're looking at, I think that's really, you know, a good step forward.
I agree. It's a long time in the making. That intersection has been a huge issue, safety issue as well, for quite some time. So it's exciting to see the work in progress. And I guess just I wanted to let folks know that there's a lot of work going on both locally within the city of Boulder and Longmont, as well as with commuting solutions to really tie in all of the local connectivity, as well as first and final mile and transportation demand management services for this important corridor. So while the CDOT RTD-led study that Anana is spearheading is the cornerstone of that work, there are other initiatives that are underway to prepare for a first phase of improvements. So we're threading the needle and working closely together to bring this significant regional benefit to our communities and businesses and commuters. So thank you, Adnana, for all that you're doing for our region. We greatly appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Audrey.
Yeah, and then lastly, and related to the 119 corridor, is we're pleased to have with us Stacy Proctor, who is the project manager for Boulder County, leading these State Highway 119 corridor bikeway final design process. So Stacy, tell us all about this exciting project. You know, cycling is super important to our region, and this is going to make cycling regionally even safer and more direct. So give us the latest and greatest. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting my screen here so I can see where we're at. Audrey, am I sharing my screen today?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah, okay, that was mine too. I just wanted to make sure that I get that correctly. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Thank
you. Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Stacy Proctor and I'm a project manager with Boulder County, and I'm the project manager for the design of the 119 bikeway. So I'll give an update on that today. Let me just
there you go. I was just going to suggest that you do it
this one. Yeah,
presentation mode.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yes. Okay. There we go. So a little bit of background for those of you who have not are not aware. The project was identified as part of the Northwest Area Mobility Study, and was also part of the 119 BRT PEL as part of the multimodal corridor vision. And then after that, we did a concept plan that CDOT led that was, basically evaluated certain elements, and we have a concept alignment that's been completed. And currently the estimated construction cost is around $30 million, and is again one of our top projects. Everyone has mentioned that 119 is a big priority for Boulder County as well. And that right now what we're focusing on is preliminary design from Boulder to Longmont for the entire distance of the planned bikeway. This is a map that shows kind of the high level conceptual alignment. We are looking at some adjustments to that. For example, as Adnana was mentioning, here at 52 right now, the bikeway alignment shows it going outside of the median because there's not enough space. But if at 52 CDOT does go with the split intersection, we'll be able to keep the bikeway in the median there. So some of the alignment is being confirmed as kind of our first step in the preliminary design. So we're looking at some of those details and trying to refine that based on community and stakeholder input. The vision for the bikeway, we really want it to be a sort of high functioning people's bikeway. We want it to be safe, direct, accessible, and comfortable, and have a seamless interface with the transit and other connections into the bike network, businesses, and communities. We want it's going to be a paved surface so that it can be maintained year round. And we'll also support e-bikes as more people adopt that as a transportation method. And then really wanting to think outside the box and look at national and international best practices for bikeway design. This might be a little bit difficult to see, but we're really looking at the bikeway as on 119 as the connection of a gap, both Longmont and Boulder, as well as Niwot and Gumber, other areas, communities in between have really great multi-use path networks. And so the bikeway will really be able to help people connect between those two communities and within those two communities. So it doesn't do a great job to just get to the edge of Boulder, but once you can get there, then you can connect into the local community multi-use path network and get downtown or get to CU or wherever else you need to go within the communities. So as you mentioned, we want it to have be safe, direct, accessible, and comfortable. And so these are kind of some of the criteria that we're looking at to meet those goals. So obviously grade separated is a really big, a really important aspect for this project. Also looking at lighting and personal security and look at those areas where there are conflict zones, really thinking through those and making sure that they're as safe as can be. We want it to be direct, so something that is a little bit different than a recreational facility where it might meander more. We're really looking for something that's going to be pretty direct, so that people can get where they need to go more quickly, and can go a little bit faster. We also want it to be accessible, something that can be used by all user types, regardless of age, ability. We want it to be something that's really inviting for people, and then also that has those first and final mile connections, so that you can get to where you need to go. And then comfort, we're looking at something that will, again, be maintained year round. We want it to be pretty wide. Again, lighting, something that'll accommodate e-bikes so that it feels comfortable and safe for people. The conceptual design has the top left cross section as its concept. We're still confirming that and have some other ideas in mind as well, that have all pros and cons and certainly cost implications as well. So we'll be seeking more input and thinking more about what is the best kind of cross section for all the different types of uses that we'll have. Here's the project schedule. We just had our kickoff meeting a few weeks ago. Nana mentioned CDOT's working on survey and other kind of data collection for the environmental work. And we're hoping to get input and review and confirm our alignment in the next few months, and then have a preliminary design early in 2022, and then hopefully be complete in late 2022 with our design. We also will have several opportunities for public engagement. Actually, go to the next slide on that. So we have sort of 4 phases that we're looking at for our engagement. So I have the project vision, confirming the conceptual design, our draft plan, and then review of the final design. So right now we're really in the project vision. This is part of that, really wanting to share with the community what the vision is for this project. And then we'll be moving more into confirming the conceptual design and getting input from stakeholders and the public and business owners about what that conceptual design looks like, and get an alignment that really makes sense. And then at the draft plan phase, we'll definitely be having several public meetings and getting input from the public and stakeholders on that. And then at the end, once we've completed it, we'll go back and kind of review that final design with the public and confirm that we were able to incorporate the thoughts that people had. So we know there's a lot of people who are really interested in this project with different needs and views and opinions. And so we really see that we want to try and integrate and balance all of the different stakeholder groups and voices, and really do as much as we can to ensure that it's not that we're hearing from as many people as possible in the community about the project. And we are working through our consultant on a equity advisory engagement committee. So we really want to try and prioritize vulnerable communities as we design this project. We want to look at accessible platforms and key locations on how to reach vulnerable communities. So looking at how to do that and looking at how we're engaging with people, where we're engaging with people, and how we're finding different communities. So we're working on developing that plan now, and we'll be co-facilitating those opportunities with the trusted community members. That's the end of this slide. I don't know, Audrey, do you want me to try and share the Google file, the Google Earth file? Do we have time for that?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
okay.
that would be terrific.
Okay, yeah, so we
do have a couple of questions that have come in as well that we can make time for.
Okay, so let me just bear with me as I try and hopefully do this. And I'm definitely not a Google Earth expert. So
you're doing great.
We will try and walk through this here. So this hopefully will give a little bit of a better sense of where things are. Are you guys seeing?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here, this is just to kind of orient you. This is the Pleasant View fields at Foothills. There's Foothills and 119. And this is actually one of the areas that we're going to be reevaluating in terms of how the bikeway connects in. This now, if you've been out there, is no longer dirt. There's a housing here, and this little multi-use path has been complete to this connection. So we're looking at some alternatives for how to connect in into the median at the beginning of the bikeway here, based on community input that we've heard so far. So this is the conceptual alignment, this red line here, but is something that we are kind of reevaluating right now. So at this, it shows it coming in here as an underpass. This is all in the right of way into the median right here. And then moving kind of north, here's J Road. We're have an underpass planned here, and then a connection onto J Road. And then moving along a little bit more, as you can see, it's primarily here in the median. There are several creek crossings we will be doing, and then also a lot of ditch infrastructure as well. So we'll need to be working closely with the ditch companies to move around their infrastructure. This here is 63rd. This is in the PEL, a BRT station. So just showing that obviously we're going to need to be coordinating very closely with both CDOT and RTD on the alignment of the bikeway and making sure that it fits with the other infrastructure that's planned here. But so this is in terms of the plan, this is the conceptual design. There will be an underpass at 63rd, and then connecting in to the transit here. And then I'll move along up north. This is the intersection that we were talking about with 52. So right now the alignment shows it going outside because there's not room right here for a bikeway to go in the median. But if, as I mentioned, if CDOT moves forward with a split intersection here, hopefully we'll be able to stay within the median and keep a shorter distance and also reduce costs without having to do two. We can do one underpass instead of two at this location, and that will save some money. And then moving along, here's Niwot Road. This is the park and ride there. An underpass is planned here, and then again, just trying to connect into where the how the park and ride and the BRT station will be designed.
We have a couple more minutes, Stacy.
Okay,
thank you.
yeah, and I think I'll just scoot along here.
It's super exciting to share the preliminary design location of the bikeway with folks.
Yeah, sorry, just accidentally. And then I'll just show kind of quickly go to the end here in Longmont. So this Longmont has some existing multi-use paths here. So we'll connect into that. There's kind of a missing link, so that needs to be completed. And then that continues on. And then this, if you're familiar, this is the underpass right here that goes under Oscar Blues is right here. Orienting on that side, most people know where that is.
Yeah.
So that's just the conceptual alignment, and like I said, we'll be confirming that over the next few months. So happy if people have comments on that or suggestions, we'd love to hear that. And then I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Okay, I have time for a couple, so I'll start at the top. One of the questions was regarding the underpasses. One second. Year-round maintenance is tough with underpasses. Will you be doing anything different in underpass design to prevent icing at underpass entrances and exits?
I guess, well, yeah, I'm not the expert on that, but that's a great comment, and we can certainly look at that with our design consultant to see if there are things we can do to minimize that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Matt Murr with Cyclists for Communities, Commuting Solutions member, says, thanks for your great work on this. 2 questions. One is it possible to include as a consideration the emerging standard of wildlife crossings with grade separated bike ped crossings? And how is the paths width related to Boulder County's large and skilled bicycling population that may travel in groups at significant speeds and potential user conflicts? That's one thing I was thinking about when I saw the cross section with a space for pedestrians. So making sure all users are safe.
Yeah. So in terms of the wildlife crossing, we haven't talked about that. I in this area, my understanding, there's not a lot of wildlife crossing, like crashes related to wildlife, but we can certainly, again, look into that as an option. And then, yeah, I think the width is definitely, there's the trade-offs for sure. And I think, it's going to be space and, how much space do we have for the bikeway, even though looking at that map, you can see that median is huge, but there's also, we need to have some distance from the highway. We also we're trying to avoid wetlands. So there's definitely constraints within the corridor. So looking at that, and then obviously cost. So a 12-foot bikeway is going to be less expensive than a 16-foot bikeway. And so I think that's kind of what we need to think about is what are the trade-offs, and we want to hear from the community about what is going to be the best approach to meet all the needs that we have.
Okay, thank you. And then last but certainly not least, Phil asks, are pedestrians being considered for all options? Some or one of the options did not seem to include PEDs in the concept design.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely going to be pedestrians. And so we'll need to be thinking about that for sure, especially at where the transit stations are. But I've seen on the 36 bikeway, a lot of people walking and running on that. So I think we'll need to think about that, whether it's a separated section of the bikeway for pedestrians or not. I think that's what we don't know yet.
More to come as you get started on
Yeah.
your final design. So thank you so much for joining us, Stacy, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks again for attending our membership meeting today. We hope that you walk away feeling more energized, engaged, and informed about transportation in the state, region, and the 119 corridor. Once again, we thank our sponsors for their generous support. Presenting sponsor, Boulder County, we appreciate you bringing us here together today, along with our other gold sponsors, the Colorado High Performance Transportation Enterprise, Elevations Credit Union, the Northwest Chamber Alliance, Google, and the RTD. The rest of our sponsors can be found on the screen you see before you here. In terms of our upcoming events, we have a lot going on over the summer, which is really exciting as society starts to open up more. So check out the screen and the upcoming events targeted to employers in our region. We have a going back to the office lunch and learn coming up in a week and a half. We have a workplace commute ambassadors network meeting in July. We also have 2 membership meetings coming up, one in August and then another specifically for State Highway 119 scheduled for September 7th. And let's not forget about Bike to Work Day, our favorite holiday of the year, right? Taking place on September 22nd. So do stay tuned for details on that. And then starting in the fall, we will be transitioning to either hybrid, offering virtual meetings with in-person meetings again. So do stay tuned for more details on that as we comply with federal guidelines around gathering. But look forward to seeing you all in person sometime soon, whether at a summer event, at an employer location, or our membership meetings this fall. So on behalf of Commuting Solutions, our board and staff, have a great day, and thanks for engaging in the transportation momentum for the Northwest Metro region. Bye.